To see all of a sudden both of these parties saying we've got this moral authority concerned about what is a war crime and what isn't. Okay, let's debate that. But the larger context is the war crimes have been shot through the history of the country.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today, I stumbled across this video where a CNN panel absolutely loses it over a military strike, and you have people like Margaret Donovan and Hillary Rosen calling it a war crime before we even have all the facts. But here is where it gets interesting. Batya Ungar-Sargon and Lydia Moynihan come in and start calling out the media hypocrisy, pointing out how previous administrations got a free pass when the same things happened. And then Dr. Cornel West comes in at the end and calls America an empire. Yes, he actually said that, so make sure you watch until the end. Please comment down below where you are watching from. I really love to see people from all over the world connecting in here. Alright now, let's get into the video.
What do you make of the fact that tonight they seem to be pointing the finger pretty directly at this admiral and naming him, both at the White House podium and Pete Hegseth in this tweet in his defense, but really saying that he's responsible for this?
Yeah, I think that that is a great indication of an administration who knows that something has gone terribly wrong here. I think that people are finally recognizing, and that's why you see we did that intro with all of these different leaders and lawmakers saying that this is a stone-cold war crime. This is so basic to everybody who has served in the military and who has trained on the law of war and the law of armed conflict, that it is a war crime, that it's no surprise that the administration will be trying to shift the blame. I think that the choice to sort of pin this on Admiral Bradley is an interesting one, but not unexpected, because Secretary Hegseth is not somebody who has exactly leadership qualities, right? He's actually largely unqualified to be in that position. And so, of course, his natural instinct would likely be to say, something has gone wrong, let me find somebody to blame this on. Now, that's not to absolve Admiral Bradley of anything. If the facts really have played out the way that it is being reported, he absolutely had a duty not to follow an unlawful order if it was Secretary Hegseth's order.
Yeah, I mean, Batya, this kind of puts the whole unlawful order thing in a different context, because now there's a real question about whether there was an unlawful order and who gave it.
Well, first of all, the story has been massively misreported. So you have actual headlines saying that Hegseth gave the order for the second hit. That wasn't in the initial Washington Post article, which claimed that following, by hearsay, somebody claimed to have heard Hegseth say, we have to kill everybody, therefore the admiral gave the second hit. So I just want to clear that up. I think that's why Hegseth wrote the tweet, is to just correct the record. But what I don't understand is, it is the Secretary of State's right to determine who is a terrorist and who isn't. The Secretary of State answers to the executive branch. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has determined that these boats are carrying terrorists, which makes the attacks on them legal. And the only question is whether that boat was disabled or whether it was destroyed. If it was destroyed, how are there still live people clinging to it? And if it was only disabled, let me just finish the point, then it was still a threat, meaning it was still a legitimate target. So I'm very confused. And by the way, I've spoken to a lot of veterans today who are also very confused by all of this bipartisan outrage.
Well, good thing we have a military lawyer at the table.
Can I just respond to two things? Yeah, first, I would say, to your point about who gave this order, what the Washington Post article said, I think that's precisely why we need the Senate and the House to do what they're supposed to do. Have oversight, have investigations.
I totally agree.
Let's figure it out.
I want more information as well.
And second, on the point of the Secretary of State making it something a designated terrorist organization, that actually does not enable you to lethally target somebody. Naming somebody on the Secretary of State's list of foreign terrorist organizations actually only does, serious things. You can sanction people who are members of DTOs or FTOs. You can ban them from immigrating to the United States. You can actually criminally prosecute people who give them support, material support to terrorism. But it does not enable you to lethally target them. Yes, many DTOs and FTOs end up being organizations that we target abroad, but that's subject to congressional authorization and the laws of armed conflict when we see them abroad.
So you are in a dispute with the administration about that, which is totally fine.
Precisely.
Yes, okay, so,
yes.
Yes. So, but I am not. I think that they have that authority, so they have not been challenged yet in any significant way, neither by Congress nor by the court.
All right, so right out of the gate, you can already see where this is going. They are wasting no time trying to frame this entire situation as some kind of unforgivable atrocity before we even have all the facts. And look, I am not saying we should ignore what happened. I am saying we should wait until we actually know what happened before we start throwing around words like what Margaret Donovan said, calling this a stone-cold war crime. That is a massive accusation. And she said it with so much confidence, like the investigation is already over, like everything has already been proven. But has it? Have we seen all the evidence? Have we heard from everyone involved? No. We are reacting to a leaked story from anonymous sources. And then she goes even further. She says the Defense Secretary is largely unqualified to be in that position. Now think about this for a second. She is not even addressing the actual incident anymore. She is pivoting to attack the leadership. That is what this is really about. They do not care about finding out the truth. They care about using this moment to go after people they already do not like. That is the play here. But then Batya Ungar-Sargon comes in, and she says something that I think everyone needs to hear. She points out that the story has been massively misreported, and she is right. If you actually go back and read the original article, the headlines do not match what was actually reported. The media added their own spin. They made it sound like a direct order was given when the sourcing does not even confirm that. That is a huge problem, because now millions of people are outraged over something that may not have even happened the way they think it did. And here's the part that really got me. Batya said she spoke to a lot of veterans that day, and they were confused by all of this bipartisan outrage. Now, why would veterans be confused? Because they understand the fog of war. They understand that combat situations are messy and complicated. They know that decisions get made in seconds that armchair analysts will debate for years. So when actual veterans are scratching their heads, wondering why everyone is freaking out, maybe that should tell us something. Maybe we should pump the brakes before we destroy careers and reputations over a story that is still developing.
I mean, I'll let you get in, but I mean, I don't want us to lose the point here. The question is actually not whether or not this was a legitimate target. I think there's dispute about that, but that's not what we're disputing. The question is whether it is legal, according to our rules of engagement and the laws of armed conflict that we abide by, to strike a target a second time when the target doesn't appear to pose a threat or is surrendering. That is the part that I think is in dispute, and that's not a question of whether they were terrorists or not. Even if they were terrorists, that might very well be illegal.
I think we should take a step back, because the only reason we know about this is because obviously somebody involved in that operation was uncomfortable with what was happening. Yeah. And that's how the Washington Post found out about it. Somebody leaked this to a reporter. People are not happy with Hegseth's leadership at the department. People are not happy with some of the things that the military is being ordered to do, whether it's the SEAL team, whether it's CENTCOM, whether it's... and I think that we have to pay attention to the fact that this isn't coming from some random reporter who was on the boat with them. This is coming from an internal source who is unhappy with the leadership of the administration.
To that point, the Washington Post had a story tonight that this is a quote from a military official. This is protect Pete bullshit, that source said. One official said of Levitt's statement, it's throwing us, the service members, under the bus. Right.
I think it's going to be hard for this guy to
there is clearly not just whatever happened in that strike, but the cleanup from the White House is causing a lot of consternation.
Yeah, well, one thing I would note is every lawmaker you played started their thought by saying, if this is true. And the fact of the matter is there is a lot in dispute tonight. We don't know the answers to everything. And Batya raised an important point that there is a difference between disabling a boat and destroying it. If it was only disabled under the laws of war, actually, they would have potentially been able to make that a mission, a military target. But I think a couple important points to make here more generally is, it's interesting to hear the media talking about this breathlessly for hours and hours when, Biden or Obama drone striked. The only thing that needed to happen was John Kirby would go on TV and say, oh, we made a mistake, we're learning from it. And nobody batted an eye. And yet now this has become the biggest,
It's
story,
actually not true that no one batted an eye at Obama's highly controversial drone strikes. That's the first thing.
No, and in fact, in the al-Awlaki strike, which was probably one of his most controversial, the legal opinion supporting that strike was fully disclosed at some point. And I think that's what needs to happen here. We need to see the legal opinions.
But I think the bigger story, though, is the average Trump.
Now, this is where the conversation starts to get really interesting, because Abby Phillip tries to reframe the whole debate. She says the question is whether it is legal to strike a target a second time when the target does not appear to pose a threat or is surrendering. And on the surface, that sounds like a fair point, right? But here is what she is leaving out. We do not actually know if the target was neutralized. We do not know if they were surrendering. We are assuming that based on leaked information from people who may have their own agenda, and that is a huge distinction. Then Hillary Rosen jumps in and says the only reason we know about this is because somebody involved in the operation was uncomfortable with what was happening, and she frames that like it is some noble whistleblower moment. But wait, let us think about this differently. What if that person had a personal problem with leadership? What if they disagreed with the mission itself? What if this leak was not about morality, but about politics? We have seen this before. Leaks in Washington are almost never just about doing the right thing. There is always an angle. Always. And then Abby reads a quote from a military official saying this is Protect Pete, and that the administration is throwing service members under the bus. Now hold on. Who is actually throwing who under the bus here? Because from where I am sitting, it looks like anonymous sources are leaking classified operational details to reporters. That is what puts service members at risk. That is what undermines the chain of command. But somehow the administration is the bad guy for trying to get ahead of a media firestorm? That does not add up. But here is where Lydia Moynihan absolutely nails it. She points out that when previous administrations had drone strikes go wrong, all that needed to happen was a spokesperson would go on TV, say we made a mistake, we are learning from it, and nobody batted an eye. And that is true. Think back to how many times we heard about wedding parties getting hit or hospitals being struck. What happened? A brief statement, and then everyone moved on. But now, suddenly the media wants to treat every military decision like it is the crime of the century. Why? What changed? The only thing that changed is who is in charge. And that tells you everything you need to know about how this game is played.
Voter looks at this and they think, why is the media breathlessly covering narco-terrorists and drug traffickers when the average American looks at this and thinks, oh, Donald Trump is actually
what I would say to
protecting
the average
border.
Trump voter is that we have rules of engagement in the world that are not there to protect narco-terrorists. They're there to protect American soldiers in combat. And so it's super important for people who, I'm sure a lot of Trump supporters who have loved ones who are going out in armed conflicts to know that when they are engaged by an enemy, that enemy, if they are not adhering to rules of war, are held responsible for those violations, and that if they are adhering to rules of war, if they are struck in an attack and then they've survived, there are rules about what happens to them. They don't get just assassinated on the battlefield if they weren't taken out in the initial strike. So that's why it matters. It matters to Trump voters. It matters to Biden voters. It also matters to the United States' credibility in the world, because this isn't just, look, I mean, we don't even know who these people were. We don't know what drugs they were carrying. It's not about that. It's about whether or not we operate by any rules at all.
Absolutely. And I think that's the real challenge here, because it's an irony, if not hypocrisy, to see both White House and Congress of both parties all of a sudden full of this moral energy when international law has been stripped and disregarded. Human rights have been stripped and disregarded. We could talk about that in regard to Gaza, war crimes, what I consider genocide, but we can debate that, right? But same is true with executors. We just had the Prince of Saudi Arabia treated like a king. You got crimes against humanity taking place every day. Same is true in the history of the United States vis-a-vis Latin America. The Monroe Doctrine of 1823, we have intervened in 31 of the 33 countries down there. So you can imagine what they think of us. Military coups against democratic regimes, Guatemala, Gulag, Brazil, we can go on and on and on. So it's an irony to see all of a sudden both of these parties saying, we've got this moral authority concerned about what is a war crime and what isn't. Okay, let's debate that. But the larger context is, the war crimes have been shot through the history of the country.
Now we get to the part that I think reveals everything about where certain people on this panel actually stand. Lydia asks a simple question. Why is the media breathlessly covering narco-terrorists and drug traffickers? And that is a question that the average American is asking right now. Because let us be real, these were not innocent tourists on a fishing trip. These were people involved in operations that traffic poison into American communities. Fentanyl, cocaine, drugs that are killing tens of thousands of Americans every single year. And somehow the media wants us to feel sorry for them? Somehow they are the victims now? And look at how Abby responds. She says, rules of engagement are not there to protect narco-terrorists. They are there to protect American soldiers. Now that sounds reasonable on the surface, but here is the thing. Rules of engagement are also not meant to be a shield for people actively harming Americans. There has to be a balance. And what frustrates people is that it feels like the rules only get enforced one way. When our enemies violate every norm imaginable, nobody says a word. But when we take aggressive action to protect ourselves, suddenly everyone becomes a legal scholar. But here is where the segment goes completely off the rails, because Dr. Cornel West comes in, and I want you to really pay attention to what he says. He starts talking about Gaza, and he casually drops that he considers it genocide. Just like that. No debate, no nuance, just his personal declaration that one of America's closest allies is committing genocide. And then he goes even further. He says the larger context is that war crimes have been shot through the history of the empire. The empire. He is talking about the United States. He is calling America an empire like we are some villain in a history book. And this is what I need people to understand. This is not about rules of engagement or legal technicalities. For some people on that panel, this is about tearing down America itself. They do not want accountability. They want condemnation. They want Americans to feel ashamed of their own country. And that is a fundamentally different conversation than what we should be having. You know what is interesting? Throughout history, there have been empires that actually did commit atrocities without any self-reflection. The Mongol Empire, the Soviet Union, countless others. They never had these debates. They never questioned themselves. The fact that America does have these debates, that we do hold ourselves to standards, that we do investigate when something goes wrong, that is what makes us different. But people like Dr. Cornel West will never acknowledge that, because their entire worldview depends on America being the villain. So when you watch a segment like this, do not get distracted by the surface argument. Pay attention to what people are really saying. Pay attention to where their logic leads, because for some of them, it is not about this one incident. It is about rewriting the entire story of what America is and what it stands for. And that is a fight that goes way beyond any single news cycle. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.